So not too long ago, the latest interactive novel dropped, telling a story about Cassie dealing with a mimic corrupted Gregory before the events of Security Breach. And the community was a bit disappointed. Was the book bad? Well, no, not really. It was a good time and it gave us some major implications on how mimic corruption works. But when you go into a book that claims to be about two of FNaF's main characters, the expectations are high. Everyone expected the book to give us some major story beats about how Gregory gets freed, or what caused Freddy's crash at the beginning of Security Breach. Everyone was really hoping for some major answers, but what I've come to realize is that the books just don't do that, and that's actually a good thing. While I am a believer that many of the book stories here are in-universe, I also think it just really doesn't matter. The books are not required reading. Every single lore reveal that you can get from the books has been solvable using only the games. Take the story GGY for example. In this story, we learn that Gregory has been working for the Mimic and luring people to the Pizzaplex if they got too close to figuring that out. While this is definitely a huge reveal, you can definitely figure that out from the therapist CDs in the game. In fact, MatPat did exactly that. He knew Gregory was doing all of this long before the book ever dropped.
Let's go back to what we assume we know about 46. They're a kid, they like the dark, they like candy, they're really good with computers.
We also recently found out that the Steam page for Secret of the Mimic was created all the way back in November 2022, long before the Mimic's origin story or even Edwin were ever introduced in the books.
We've actually been talking about making this game for a long time, and we were developing the game kind of while these books are coming out.
And considering that the game is also telling the Mimic's origin, we really didn't ever need the book at all, which makes sense. Locking major information behind a book series would only serve to confuse the mass majority of the fan base.
Oh, what am I looking at? What am I looking at? What am I looking at? What are you?
This is why we've only ever gotten side stories. And I was worried that the interactive novels were going to change that, since the first one was featuring the phone guy from FNaF 1, but no, the book didn't really do anything but expand on what we already knew. Even the new reveals that Cassie and Gregory have been breaking into the Pizzaplex every night and are responsible for all the little hideouts you find is something we probably could have figured out in due time. Scott just gave us a little nudge. What I'm trying to say is that the books have never been anything more than supporting evidence for the games. If you wanted to ignore the books entirely, you could. There's absolutely nothing that you can't figure out with the games alone. That being said, there is one oddball, one name that throws the entire fanbase into an all-out war: Andrew. For some, this boy is the entire reason people don't want the books to be in the GameLine universe. If you've somehow never heard of him, Andrew is from a story called The Man in Room 1280. After the fire in FNaF 6, Afton is brought to a hospital in a state that should not be functional, being kept alive by an angry spirit who tortured him with endless nightmares, refusing to let anyone give him the sweet release of death. Said spirit is described as a boy with black curly hair wearing an alligator mask, and that is the part that confuses everyone. What is being described here is undoubtedly the events of Ultimate Custom Night, and given that the face we see from that game is a picture of Scott's son, the vengeful spirit being a young boy makes perfect sense. What doesn't make sense though is that Ultimate Custom Night ends with Golden Freddy. The entire fandom pretty much mutually agreed that Golden Freddy was behind Ultimate Custom Night, so why is it this random alligator kid? Some have pointed to another story that featured black curly hair inside of Golden Freddy, suggesting Andrew might have some ties to him, as why else would they tease us with that detail and never give us any other payoff? It feels like we're supposed to make this connection, especially when nearly every book story antagonist turned out to be made from Andrew and Afton's souls. But then, what about Cassidy? How can this random extra kid be Golden Freddy instead of the fifth missing child? It makes no sense. So let's take a step back and ask the question, what do we actually know about Andrew? And surprisingly, not much is confirmed. You'd think that as a new character, his mysterious past would have been paid off by the end of the book, but no, he passes on without us ever finding out. Many have tried to explain Andrew using Into the Pit, as when we travel back to 1985, we see a sixth child, but there's a major issue with this. In the story, it's repeatedly called out as weird that Oswald was somehow able to draw the events of the story before they happen, and by the story's end, we never find out how. But as the books continue on, the pit makes a return and we finally get our answer. We find out that many of the victims throughout the various stories are now trapped inside of the pit, looping through an endless fever dream of collective memories, suggesting that when Oswald jumps into the pit, he's not actually time traveling, but is trapped inside of a dream like everybody else. In fact, I don't think he ever actually leaves. When the Stitch Wraith finds everyone trapped here, he can't get them out. All he can do is show up and try to give them a happier memory to be trapped in. That's why in the game, we see the Stitch Wraith show up at Oswald's window. You have to remember, the Stitch Wraith doesn't get built until after Jeff's Pizza has been cleaned out. This is a point that the Stitch Wraith shouldn't exist. Oswald is still in the pit. What we're shown in the past isn't the real 1985, but an exaggerated manifestation of how the kids remember it. The kids never saw William when they looked at Spring Bonnie, they saw a rabbit monster, so that's exactly how he appeared in the dream. It's an inaccuracy, and the pit world is full of these, and I can tell you with confidence that Andrew being there is one of these inaccuracies. How do I know? Well, when we return to the pit in one of the interactive novels, Oswald is still here, looping through the same dream, and this time there's only 5 kids. Andrew was an inaccuracy. As long as Andrew considered himself to be a part of this group, it makes sense for the pit world to reflect that. The point being, the pit is not a credible source. Maybe it was showing us the truth, maybe it wasn't, but ultimately, we simply cannot trust anything being shown to us in this dream world. But then, what do we actually have to go off of? You see, when we actually get to hear what Andrew has to say, he doesn't actually remember anything. He doesn't know what William did, or why he's mad. To quote him, "I remember I wanted him to suffer, the way he made me suffer, but I don't remember what he did. It's weird. I remember being so angry and determined, but I don't know why." Notice that one part. I wanted him to suffer the way he made me suffer. The same thing is said in Ultimate Custom Night.
This is how it feels, and you get to experience it over and over and over again, forever. I will never let you leave.
Whatever Andrew is doing to William is something that William had inflicted on Andrew, and through context clues, we're able to figure out what that is. You see, in the game, there's a random chance that your office will change. These offices became purchasable thanks to one of Darko's suggestions, but they were originally random chance Easter eggs.
Originally, I had it to where they would just randomly pop up. Whenever I gave you that original test copy to play, you had a 1% chance of each of those offices appearing, and you made a comment saying, "Hey, it'd be cool if you could unlock those," and then I changed that, and now I think it's a great feature of the game. So
because both Andrew and William have their minds intertwined at this point, we have memories from both of them at play, and one of these offices is none other than the FNaF 4 bedroom, a room that William trapped kids in and experimented on them with nightmare gas. And wouldn't you know it, this is a perfect match for what Andrew is inflicting on William, trapping him in a room to fend off against animatronics over and over again forever.
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed.
The one you should not have killed, because he wasn't supposed to die. William did not intend to kill him. This made a lot of sense to me, because thinking back to FNaF 4, we know from the phone call ambience that Mike was the one having nightmares. And in my past timeline video, I theorized that these nightmares were a result of the Scooper, a machine that injected Mike with the souls of the missing children. We see this happen with Carlton in the novel trilogy, and this allows the spirits to enter his head. But given that the nightmare experiments were absolutely real experiences, the only way Mike can be dreaming about them is if he, or one of the injected spirits, was one of those experiment victims. Someone in this collective needs to have those memories. And if Andrew was one of those victims, it would mean he would have died in the same facility as the Scooper. If there's any point that an extra spirit would have been added to the story, and eventually FNaF 6, it's here. I thought this was perfect. The person causing the FNaF 4 nightmares on Mike was causing the UCN nightmares on William.
Symmetry, my friend!
Go to hell.
But that's when it started to hit me. There's another spirit that fits the description of everything I've just said. One that people have theorized to have been a victim of the nightmare experiments. One that is known to cause hallucinations. One that has been recently depicted as aggressive. One that has ties to Golden Freddy. You're really gonna hate this because I don't know if I like it myself, but I'm talking about the Crying Child. I know, my immediate thoughts were that there's absolutely no way these two can be the same person. But as a theorist, I can't just dismiss things I don't like, so I decided to humor the idea. Sure, the week before showed us a much more aggressive side to the Crying Child and tied him to Golden Freddy, but this is not enough to convince me. But then, enter Help Wanted's DLC, Curse of Dreadbear, a game set in 1983, depicting a bear that had just burst out of a mound, walking through a forest with a lone house in the distance. That's right, Curse of Dreadbear has been about Midnight Motorist and the Crying Child this entire time. The funny thing is, I noticed Dreadbear walking around behind me, but what what I didn't notice is what he came from. He emerged from the lake, and not just any lake, a red lake, something we know is tied to the vengeful spirit. In Ultimate Custom Night, Old Man Consequences tries to convince the spirit to stop, and they proceed to drown themselves in the red lake. Once again, I didn't want to believe it, but Scott doubled down in the new racing game 5 Laps at Freddy's. The Midnight Motorist level has always been the most interesting part about that game, already featuring connections to Andrew, but what I haven't seen anyone talk about is that the rain turns red. The red lake in Curse of Dreadbear was indeed no coincidence. By now, things were starting to click in my mind. If you didn't know, meeting Old Man Consequences in Ultimate Custom Night actually unlocks the same ending in FNaF World, which raised the question, why? How do these two things connect? Well, if we go off the theory that FNaF World is the crying child's mind, and UCN is about the crying child's mind entwined with Williams, then this moment in UCN is taking place in the same location. Entering this spot in UCN is the exact same as entering this spot in FNaF World. Scott was trying to tell us that this is the same mind. I hate to say it, but this would make a lot of sense. If you think back to what I said at the beginning of the video, every single lore reveal from the books has only ever been a hint towards the games. Andrew has always just been this weird exception. But what if he wasn't? This entire time, the connections to Golden Freddy, the ties to the Nightmare experiments, the depiction of a young boy, the random FNaF World characters appearing across the desk, even FNaF AR ties the crying child to the drowning motif. Could Andrew have been the crying child all along? Somehow I'm still hesitant to say, but I wouldn't be making this video if that was all I had. Remember how I mentioned Andrew in that Midnight Motorist level? Well, he wasn't the only masked kid in the audience. Just like the kids in the background of Happiest Day, people have been quick to compare these masks to the mediocre melodies. But there's always been a few problems with that. For instance, there's never been an alligator amongst the mediocre melodies. But it just so happens that the new game, Secret of the Mimic, is showing us exactly that. An alligator alongside the original mediocre melodies. And considering that the outside of the manor has a blatant sign labeled masks, I'm willing to bet you that this is where these masks came from. And if this is where Andrew got his alligator mask, it makes sense for him to only ever be speaking through the mediocre melodies. They have a tie to his past. But here's the real kicker. What many people don't know is that for the past year, Steel Wool has secretly been teasing Secret of the Mimic on social media. For example, they started a hashtag called Where's Helpy, where they took photos of a Helpy plush in various locations. And one of these photos is Helpy sitting atop the word Helper, which is exactly what we end up seeing in the trailer, a version of Helpy named Helper. I wouldn't be surprised if all of these images are actually tied to Helper's many appearances in the game, but it doesn't stop there. Steel Wool also started another hashtag called Guess the Sketch, and this one got weird, spanning from Combat Carl from Toy Story to Jack from Jack in the Box. But just like the Helper stuff, we have proof that these two were teasers for Secret of the Mimic. And amongst those images is one that's very straightforward, the Crying Child. The Crying Child could make an appearance in the game. How? Why? Where? I have no idea, and maybe I've been yapping over nothing. But when the game comes out next week, do be prepared for the non-0% chance that he could show up, and he could be the one to put on that mask.